That's cute.
This is the One Accord podcast, and we're down a man again, but this time it's Eric who's missing, and we got Greg back. So, Greg, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Joe?
I'm doing well. We
Good.
missed you last time, so it's nice to have you back.
Yeah,
You want
it was odd. So
to?
it was odd being gone and odd watching the conversation. Because I watched the video from last week, and so yeah, it was a conversation I didn't mind missing. Like I
Sure.
feel like as I watch this, I'm like, wow, I feel like we've covered this ground already, and so I was like, it's a good week to be gone.
Yeah, we certainly did. No, we picked that on purpose while you were
Yeah,
gone because we knew you wouldn't mind missing that one, and it is difficult sometimes to figure out what we should talk about when the other person's there, and so or isn't there. And so today, again, we're missing Eric. We appreciate him, and so we tried to figure
missing
tried to figure out something that we could talk about that would be a good thing to talk about when he wasn't there. And so we're talking about some resources. In particular, we're talking about resources that we've created, things that we're passionate about, things that we care about. And so you wrote a book. We're going to talk about that. I've written a couple of books. We're going to talk maybe about those. But there's some other resources that we've also created and things that, again, we'll spend our time talking about those. I wanted to start us off with some free resources. Anybody who's watching, sometimes I think when people talk about resources, it's one of the reasons I actually don't even like talking about some of the resources I've made is I think people think that you're always just trying to sell them something, sell them something, sell them something. That's not, I'm sure some people do it that way. That's their intent. Disclaimer, you don't have to buy any of the things that we're talking about. It's fine. We don't need your money. The things that we've made, we think are a benefit for you. But some of the stuff, a lot of the stuff that we do is free. And so on our website, TheExaltedChrist.com, there's two pretty neat resources, I think. We're going to hopefully build more and more of those down the road. But there's a spreadsheet that has some verses from the Old Testament, many verses from the Old Testament that Christ fulfilled. So it's a Christ in the Old Testament spreadsheet that kind of categorizes certain things to hopefully help us be better witnesses of the Old Testament prophecies of Christ. So that's one thing. It's free. All you have to do is put in your email address, I think, and it emails it to you. And then there's another one that has these one-page overviews for every book in the Old Testament. And we will, in the not too distant future, have one for the New Testament. So for people who like to study the Bible, that's got a great resource in there. We have some on our channel here, some Bible overviews. And I kind of used to do like one-page things. I received some one-page resources when I was in seminary that was done by somebody else. These ones are ones that I've kind of done my own and, over my study over the years, and it's been influenced by a lot of the people that I get to study with. And so it's not all original to me, but those things are available for free. But some of the things that aren't free, again, we didn't do them simply to get rich off of. And I certainly haven't gotten rich off it. Greg, you gotten rich off of your stuff?
No, as you're talking about free versus paid resources, I'm doing the mental arithmetic, going, I'm pretty sure I've given away more copies of my books my book than I've sold. So it's funny. I went to pull a copy off my shelf and realized that I'd given away my last good copy. So the only one I have here is you can see it. It's my my author's proof.
Oh, there you go.
Amazon, when they publish before they roll your book out, they send you a proof copy that says you can't sell it. So yeah, I'm surely not. Yeah, I don't even want to tell you. It's almost a little embarrassing how much I had to claim on my taxes last year for book sales. It's like, guy, like, this is a little absurd. We should probably not have to do this. But
well, certainly some people do get rich off of books, and maybe one day you or I or both of us will get rich off of our book sales. But I didn't write my books to get rich. I wrote them because I think that they're valuable, and a lot of the stuff that are included in my books, I've written free articles. But the problem is, you know what, you can send links to everybody, or you can put a book in someone's hand. And so, if you actually have the resource, these aren't free to make. And so that's why, certain things do have to be purchased. And so there are purchasable resources, but again, hopefully they're valuable, and hopefully you get more value from the resource than the purchase price. But let's talk about your book. Why'd you even write it in the first place? Because obviously it wasn't to get rich. So why did you write that?
It was not to get rich. Yeah, actually, this is an interesting story, and you're involved in it. So a mutual friend of ours, Brian, and I had gone to a church conference it's a church about 45 minutes away, to hear Justin Peters speak. Do you know that? Are you familiar with Justin Peters?
I think I hear you talk about him more
Okay.
than almost anybody else. I think you've got like a Justin Peters ministry shirt that you've
I do.
worn.
Yeah. I bought there at that conference. So
I am not
yeah,
overly familiar with him and his ministry.
gotcha.
Though, no.
He does a lot of work trying to shed a lot of light on the word of faith movement. You know, the I can't even think of their name. You know, Benny Hinn's and you know those.
He's promoting them, or
no, shedding light as in like calling them out, and no, for sure. So we went to.
I was gonna say you're about to shock me if you were like,
I would shock myself. Yeah, please do not hear me say that.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we went to this local church, and we went there during a time when we were going through a lot of church pain, a lot of church struggle. And so we're kind of just sitting there waiting for this conference to get started. And as we were sitting there, we noticed an older gentleman, I don't know, probably 70s or so, walk over to this young man. He would have been early 20s. And we were close enough that we're listening in on the conversation, and we could see, Joe, you understand this. You can recognize a bag of books from a mile away. And so we noticed he had a bag of books in his hand. And as the conversation went on, the guy said to this young man, he's like, listen, I know you just graduated. So I think you graduated from seminary. He says, I know you just graduated, and I know the last thing you want to do is read another book. He said, but that time's going to pass. And so I bought you these books, and when you're ready to start reading again, here you go. And, Brian and I looked at each other and jaws hanging open, go, there are Christians here who actually love each other and care about each other. And thought, man, how encouraging is that? And so, this is probably a long story. Sorry.
I got time.
That's we got a while. Out of that, I went, I can do that. That's easy enough. And so, what I started doing was handing out a copy of Ryle's Thoughts for Young Men. Little book, thin, tiny, easy read. If I remember right, Leo read it in like 45 minutes, and so it's not War and Peace by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, he's a fast reader, but
he's a fast reader. Yeah. But in it, Ryle is talking, as you'd guess by the title, to young men, but he's doing it in such a genuinely fatherly, pastoral way. It's just a simple conversation. It's not deep theological things you have to wrestle with. Just advice, just helpful thoughts. And so I started handing that out to young men, and it was great. I hope it was encouraging. I assume it was encouraging. But quickly Alyssa and I were like, well, we want to be able to hand something out to young women as well, young ladies. And so started hunting around. I couldn't really find anything. And, I reached out to other pastors I know, and like, hey, what's out there? And couldn't really come up with anything. And so I reached out, made contact with, kind of a nationally known pastor. I suppose if I said his name, many people would probably recognize it. Asking him this question, he's a lot more connected, and asked him for I'm looking for something for young ladies, teenage girls, to be helpful and encouraging. And he said, oh, you ought to give them this book and that book. And every book that he suggested was a book on how to be a good wife, being godly, biblical wife, or on motherhood. And I, my comment back to him was, well, I appreciate, and I don't see anything wrong with teaching them to be good wives and good mothers, but I want to particularly address that teenage years. And he replied to me and said, well, they're eventually going to be wives and mothers, so give them a book about that. And I thought, well, but they're also eventually going to be grandmas, and they're eventually going to be dead. So, like, why give them a book at all?
They got morbid real fast, Greg.
It did. I'm like, you're getting a peek behind the curtain. And I thought the question out of that came to my mind: like, are there no issues that our teen Christian girls struggle with that ought to be addressed? Like, are they reduced or are they advanced out of the struggles of that stage? And should they be thinking, should there the only focus, not I'm okay with a focus, but should the only focus for young ladies be mothering and being a wife? No. And so I kind of just resigned myself to, well, it's just not out there. Figure something out later. And so I was telling you about this, and you're like, well, why don't you just write the book? Like, why don't you do it? Like,
That sounds like good advice.
It sounds, well, I don't know. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. And of course, my response to that is, why would anybody read anything that I have to write? But and I think you probably asked me that question a number of times. Like, stop being lazy and just do it yourself. And so eventually, that's what I did. Sat down. Took a while. Like, I mean, I don't know. I don't. If it's 100 pages, no, it's not 100 pages. It probably took me 6-8 months to get it together and put it through editing a number of times. And, I wanted to quit a few times, but yeah, so, I mean, that's the story behind, Thoughts for Young Ladies. And, in my mind, it really was, it was the fact that it's sold by Amazon is only because I needed somebody to publish it. And, nobody of, there's, none of the big Christian publishers are going to pick me up. And so it's on Amazon, but, I truly do. I'd have to do the math, but I truly do believe I've given more away. But that was my goal. I wanted a resource that I could hand out and be encouraging to young ladies as I was trying to be encouraging to young men.
Yeah. Well, the beauty of the world that we live in currently is that it's never been probably easier than it is today. To be able to actually publish something. And of course, that means that a lot of junk gets published, and there's a lot of stuff that people. Why? Who needs?
Did you ever
this?
see that? Did you ever see that book? I think it was by Michael Knowles, like something like 100 Reasons to Vote for a Democrat. Did you ever see this book?
No.
I mean, we're talking, it's probably 3/4 of an inch thick cover, 100 Reasons to Vote for a Democrat. Every single page besides the copyright page is blank.
Really?
So, and it sold millions of copies. I mean,
That's funny.
people bought millions of copies of a absolutely 100% blank book. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of junk gets published.
Yeah. Oh, a lot of junk gets published, but the sentiment is, if there's something that would be a benefit but doesn't exist, and you see the need for it, why not? And so yeah, there is a part that I guess you're not marketable because you're not a celebrity or something, but why not you? And why not? You're a dad, and you see this need, and so why not be able to fill that? So let's be a little bit more specific. You told us how long it took. I know that you like to write, but why was it so frustrating? Why did you want to quit a couple of times on doing this? Because you more than average enjoy writing. I know that's some of the things that you enjoy doing. So what was so frustrating about this project in particular that made you want to quit a couple times?
Wow. Probably just my insecurity, right? Like, I wasn't the only one who when the thought of me writing a book came up, went, well, why would anybody want to read what you have to write? Like that
You're surrounded by so many encouragers.
Man, I tell you what, I'm surrounded by some very not all encouragers. So I mean, that's really the biggest reason, right? Like, I'm old enough that I remember back when being published actually meant something. And I'm I can't remember if I told this, maybe started the last episode that I was in, right? Like, in high school, I was such a bad student. Like, my teachers were shocked that I graduated, and none of my teachers probably would have expected to see me in college. And so the idea that I would write a book is pretty foreign. So discouraging in that I was discouraging myself, and yeah, I had some Eeyores around me who weren't really all that helpful. So.
Well, that's funny because I know I'm one of the Eeyores around you, and I'm often probably not that helpful, but for whatever reason,
it's funny, right? Like you are Eeyore-ish, but you're also the guy that's, poking me in the back with a stick going, keep on
Yeah,
going, keep on going. So
yeah.
I don't think you're as Eeyore as you often come across.
Fair enough.
So
Well, I
yeah,
appreciate that.
yeah,
As you were kind of seeing the need for this resource, you kind of articulated some of it of what you didn't want. You didn't want books that were just focused on mothering and being a wife. And certainly some ladies maybe never get married. Being single is, I know people don't talk about that, but those things might not ever be something that a woman would think about, and men too. Again, and so I wasn't all that familiar with J.C. Ryle's book. Leo read it. My son read it. I don't think I ever read it. It's on my list of things to do. It always keeps getting bumped
yeah.
down from the number one spot. But so, like, what kinds of issues did you end up including in the book for people who haven't read it? Obviously, I've read your book, but for those who haven't read it, like, what kinds of things did you start to include? Because you said what you didn't want it to be. So, what did it end up
Sure.
being? And did it end up being exactly what you wanted, or did that process evolve over time?
I think there was actually an origin story before this. Um, when my now adult girls were much younger, I had an idea of, and it wasn't really a book so much as I wanted to go through Proverbs and, you know, teach them Proverbs, but then write out for them or be able to give to them not a not a retelling, but just an application. Like how, okay, here's Proverbs 1. Now, what does that look like in your life? And so as I sat down to write, it in the back of my mind very much was it is if you read the book, it very much is Proverbs driven. If you go through this, you're going to say out any out of any biblical book, this feels like Proverbs, and so many quotes come out of Proverbs. Um, so I didn't really know what I had no idea. And this is it's funny. You listen to people who like professional pastors who talk about how to write a sermon. This is the way you write a sermon, and you write you have an outline, and then you write the meat, and then you put the introduction on. That's not how I do it. I literally sit down and start writing, and sometimes I don't know where I'm going until I get to the end, and um, so I didn't really have a plan. Um, but I knew that it was going to be Proverbs driven, and that just makes sense, right? Like if you're talking to young people, male or female, about wise living, especially through that teenage young adulthood, the book of Proverbs is the natural place to go.
Hmm.
So some of the things. Well, first of all, the gospel. First chapter is I present. And again, I'm trying to use very relatable ideas, images, situations, and so the gospel is front and center. Things like how to choose your friends wisely. As with most teenage girls, my girls when they were in that stage, we had friends that were friends that we wanted. They had friends that we wanted them to have, and then they had some friends that they didn't want to have or we didn't want them to have. And kind of the idea running through that is, uh, you know, you walk with wise people, you be wise. You walk with fools, and you're going to suffer harm. So, trying to teach them to have a view on their friends through that lens. Like, is this person wise? Now, they're teenage girls, so are they really wise? Well, no, but some are wiser than others, and some are more foolish than others, and some are going to lead you down better paths than others. So there's a chapter on that. There's obviously, maybe not obviously, but there's a chapter on young men. Like as you are, you know, as you're thinking about, as you start to think about, and when you're 13, 14, 15, at least that's when my daughters did, as you're starting to think about young men, how ought you be looking at that situation? And how should you be thinking about yourself as you're beginning to think about what a future relationship with a young man is going to look like? Um, the need, another topic, the need to be productive, the need to be industrious, kind of goes to the Proverbs 31 woman, right? Um, at least in Christian circles, we're very quick to talk about how a young man ought to be working and laboring and being industrious. But I think that very much we often will miss the emphasis for young women to be industrious. Now, I agree that that might look very different um, for a young man compared to a young woman. I think of of your daughter. She has a cookie business, right? Like it might be odd if your son Leo decided he wanted to do a cookie business. Like, really? Like okay, but it's not odd at all that Karis would want to do that. And so here she is learning to be industrious, learning to fulfill obligations and go out and sell and labor for a greater thing. So talk about that. One of the chapters that really was important to me to write was the need to be the best word I came up with, or at least that I'm remembering right now, is genuine. What I saw a lot with my girls and maybe more with their friends than them, because they didn't my girls couldn't fool me as much, um, was the tendency for young people. This isn't just for young ladies, but the tendency for young people to put on these different costumes, right? Like I have my church costume, I have my friends at school costume, I have my uh, whatever it is, my sports costume, where I'm this person here and I'm this person over here, and that probably should be applied more to everybody than just young people. But I think it's a particular trap for young people where they get themselves into a group and they start to wear that costume more and more and more and forget about um, what they ought to be as opposed to putting on the costume. So address that. And then obviously what book on addressed to young ladies would be complete without a chapter on modesty. So we talk about biblical modesty. Um, a chapter, another one that really kind of weighed heavy on me personally was um, what I called faithfully waiting. This idea that there are times in a Christian's walk where doors just aren't opening, things aren't happening. Um, for maybe for a young lady who's reaching adulthood, she's waiting for that boyfriend or looking for that job or wanting to start that career, and doors just don't open and don't open and don't open, and so you feel like you're stuck in this waiting room of God. And how do you wait faithfully? So,
Yeah. So thank you for kind of that outline
and there's
you know,
more.
sure. No, it's a these are all important things, and certainly a resource that kind of brings all these things in together. I find to be valuable. I've given it to my young ladies in my house, and I have some other younger ladies that I will give it to as they get a little bit older. And the thoughts that you have, I think, are certainly appropriate. And I know of no other resource like this, which of course I told you, and as you said, and so I'm glad that you wrote it, and now it makes it so that it is something that is again packs a lot of a lot of important topics into a relatively short read. I mean, it isn't long. It is very easily digestible, but at least as you think about these things. And you're right. I think the that playing dress up concept is the one that um, I not just for young ladies, but I think just young people in general to realize you don't have to pretend, or constantly, be acting like somebody else. And man, it would be so great to learn these lessons young and just be
Yeah.
who we are, and be who God's made us to be. And so again, a lot of great stuff in here. Obviously, as you mentioned, a lot of it was driven by Proverbs, but of course, it's coming from your perspective. It's coming from your experience. How much of the content was maybe driven by kind of like parenting wins on your side, like things that you did that you thought like
Mm.
really worked out well, and maybe how much was driven by stuff that you look back and go, man, I really messed up on this one, and I hope that we could help others to avoid that. Was it a mix of the two, or was it mostly just driven by Proverbs, and not really, were you trying to keep your own experience out of it? I don't know how.
No.
You certainly can't keep all your experience out of it.
Yeah, no. I think every topic is definitely directly sprung from something that I saw.
Hmm.
No, it's something I saw, and that hopefully I was looking at through a biblical lens. That doesn't. That's not to say that I saw it in my daughters. Well, it's not to say that what really brought it front and center were my daughters. This isn't a book about my daughters by any stretch of the imagination, um, but it is a book of lessons that I saw going along through fatherhood. Sometimes when I looked at my daughters, sometimes when I looked at other young ladies in the church, sometimes when I looked at the landscape of young ladies out in the culture. But yeah, for sure, this is and if I didn't have to I didn't have to keep it to about 75 pages, right? Like every chapter, man, if it's 5 pages, there might be a couple that are, I suppose you do the math and you'd figure out, but 10 chapters, 70-ish pages. And there are just a host more. So the door is definitely open for in the future, more thoughts for young ladies. Um, but I wanted to keep it short, wanted to keep it concise. Um, and so when I examined my time as a father, looking at what young ladies were facing, these were the 10 issues that sprung to mind for
Yeah.
me.
Now that you've written it and it exists and you've been able to distribute it at least to to some people, and is there anything in there that I mean, you opened the door for potential more thoughts for young ladies? Like, is there something in there that you're like, I wish I would have maybe included this
Mm.
issue, or do you feel like the 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 10 that you had, that was because I the once you've written something, it's encased now. This
Yeah,
is it. And so,
unfortunately.
yeah. So, I mean, if you were writing it again, would you pick the
Mm.
same 10 issues, or is there one that you would maybe drop out and put something else in?
It seems like, because what I released this released in January of last year. And it seems like over the past now year and a half, I've thought of other things, but those are just they aren't coming to mind right now. Um, there are some things you always go, oh, maybe I could have said it better with this example or illustrated it better that way. And man, that's just the nature, either my nature, it's the nature of writing books that
Yeah.
you always go back and you critique yourself. And that's why I don't know. This is the first time I opened it up in probably 6 months. Oh yeah, I forgot about that chapter.
Yeah.
Um, no, I imagine again because I have two daughters who I brought now to adulthood, and now my next wave is just now approaching the time where these book or this book is or these lessons will be applicable. I have no doubt that as time goes on, I'll need to address other things, especially as our world continues to spiral down into clown world. Um, if I had written this book 20 years ago, I'm assuming that I was a father 20 years ago, some of the issues that ought to be addressed or would have addressed back then, um, you know, they'd be almost disconnected from reality today.
Sure.
And so, how do you address all the craziness? Um, uh, yeah, there are so many because the thoughts need to stay relevant, need to stay connected with reality, which is the beauty of God's word, right? When you
Mhm.
get down to it, you don't need to read this, not really. It maybe it's helpful, but if you have the book of Proverbs and you have the rest of the Bible, um, you don't really need another book on your bookshelf. Praise God. But I would probably, as time goes on, find new topics, more topics. How to not be a furry, right? Like let's not pretend you're a cat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, certainly, the as you said, like anytime we're adding stuff to, Solomon wrote it long, long time ago in the book of Ecclesiastes, right? Of the reading books is endless, right? I mean, there's just,
yeah.
and that was before the printing press, and that was before Amazon and publish on demand and all this kind of stuff. So, certainly, anytime we create a resource or do something, it's a supplement, right? Of course, people should be reading the book of Proverbs is really all you need, but it is helpful sometimes to have someone else's voice, and especially someone who has had those experiences, to try and uh, bridge the gap and make it very directly applicable. And I mean, you have some great illustrations in there
Thanks.
that stick with me. I read your book, before it was published, and then after it was published, I read it again. But if it came out January last year, it's been a year and a half since I read it. But I still I have some of the images that you used still in my mind, and the idea of going around kissing a bunch of frogs and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, kiss the frogs, absolutely.
It's
Or asking a prince to kiss you, and you're a frog,
That's
right?
right. And
Um,
so, the imagery I thought, was good. And it has your, your personality, a little bit of your, wit and
Sorry.
charm. And those are good things. And I certainly, your voice maybe isn't one that everybody cares about, but I know you and value you. And I know you love your family. And I know you took this work seriously and wanted to bring, biblical wisdom, but also say it in your voice. And I think you achieved it. I think you hit what you were aiming for. And again, it took you, like you said, 6 to 8 months and some frustration and made you want to quit a couple of times. But I'm glad you didn't. I'm
Oh, yeah.
glad that it exists, and I was happy
I,
to.
and, I- and I think the idea of the voice, it was important to me, right? Because what I didn't want is to try to write a book where I, as a man and as a dad, tried to write this flowery, sappy, syrupy thing. Um, if should you ever hear me talk to my daughters, wow, like I tried to speak in this book the way I talk to my kids, which plenty of sarcasm. Like you haven't seen Eliza in a while. Eliza's my right now 8-year-old. Eliza has mastered the art of sarcasm. She's great, and um, she gets that naturally and through a lot of exposure. And so, yeah, I wanted it to sound like me. I wanted it um, because I didn't want this fake silliness, right? I think I say it's I say something like it's biblical wisdom with hot sauce on it because that's how I talk to my kids. They get the zingers and the jokes and the and the bite
Yeah,
that I've picked up over the years.
yeah.
So,
Well, as you said, I've of course, there are certain things that probably we would rephrase or something, or we could have improved upon. Maybe delete this paragraph, add a paragraph here.
yeah,
But I'm glad that at this point, after it's been published for at least a little while, that you are still feeling satisfied. With the things that you did include. I think that you included stuff that I had never really thought about, and I was appreciative of the discussion that you had in there. And again, it's not that I uh, never thought about those things for my daughters, in any way, shape, or form. But like this is not a project that I would have created, and so I'm glad that you created it, and I'm glad to see that, like I said, that it exists. And I'm certainly pleased, because I did have a little bit of behind the scenes, opportunity to talk with you, and
yeah,
and I didn't know exactly what was going to come out of the end of that process, or if anything would. Sometimes people start something and quite frankly they don't finish it, and so there was a real possibility that there would have been no book after all the conversation. So
yeah.
I'm glad I get to hold it in my hand. I was pleased to purchase a few copies to give away and to have in my household. I still
And the
have a
chap the
couple on my.
chapter on the chapter on biblical modesty, like it wouldn't have been a thing if it weren't for your gentle encouragement. More like Greg, you need to write a chapter on this, and so it was. No, you definitely helped make it better. You were one of my editors, and I think if I remember right, Beth was one of my beta readers. One of the people that I went to, like, how does this sound, and is this an issue? What other issues should I address? And
Mhm.
so you guys were very helpful
Yeah, well,
in the creation of it.
we were pleased to be a part of the process, and again, I intend to give out more copies, and for anybody who's watching, I think it's well worth the purchase price. I think it's a good thing, for dads to be able to give to their daughters and talk about it with them. A lot of dads have a hard time connecting with their daughters, and I think I know you seem to every I don't know to to the best of my knowledge, you seem to have a great relationship with your daughters. That not everybody does. I know there was I don't know if this is still true, but there at least was a time that one of the most Googled things was, from dads, how do I connect with my daughter? It's a
Yeah.
hard thing for some dads to do. And so to be able to have a resource that, maybe they do want their daughters to know these things, but they just don't know how to articulate them. It's good to have a resource like this. And so, I'm, uh, like I said, I look forward to handing out more over time. I have distributed some, um, you know, maybe the ones that I copied, you had to, report on your tax income, because I'm happy to pay the price for it. And I think it's
You were
well worth the
you were the one that
publishing.
bought it.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, is there other thoughts that you have? Just kind of the writing process in general. I mean, anything else that you would, anybody who's maybe considering this, or just doesn't know about this, that you would want to share with them, like.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. The process is way easier. The process of getting it published, the taking your thing and having it for sale on Amazon, is really, really easy. I was shocked. I didn't expect it to be as easy as it was. Um, the the act of writing, I have spent a number of years working on trying to become a better writer. It's probably one of the most humbling things you'll ever do. The process of putting your thoughts down on paper or digital, and then having them critiqued by others. There's always this goofy thing that happens in the back of my mind where I write it and I read it and I edit it. Okay, I'm gonna send this to somebody, and man, they're gonna be blown away. Like it's gonna be they're gonna be shocked by how profound, and then you get it back and there's red everywhere and circles and I'm like, oh wow, I really kind of mentally handicapped and I didn't realize it. Um, so that's humbling, and I think that's good. There's plenty of people who talk about the benefits of writing, of being able to put your thoughts down on paper, and I can't recommend that highly enough. Whether you ever intend to publish it or not, it is a good thing to go through that process of writing and refining your ideas. And then once you've done that, put it through a couple of good editors, um, man, bringing your thoughts to print and that's the easy part.
Yeah.
So
Now, the process of writing a serious writing project, obviously some people like to journal and things like that, that's also helpful for all the reasons that you said. But like a bigger project where you're really trying to connect dots and have a cohesive, whether it was you're telling a story, or writing some nonfiction, thing where you're trying to communicate to a general audience, the refining process. Um, yeah, it can certainly be painful, but the clarity that can come out of the other side, if you take that seriously, is a beautiful thing. I'm sure that you grew, personally, even thinking about these things. You're dwelling on Proverbs, and so you are a man writing a book on thoughts for young ladies, and yet you can also, I'm sure, benefit from the wisdom that's being brought, because these things, are generally applicable, and it's true for you to be wise about the people you associate with, and the crowds that you run in, and all that kind of stuff. Um, and you said something earlier that I really appreciate, and I think a lot of people, when they're writing something, or you talk about sermons, or any other kind of project, they're already, they kind of have an initial thought, and it it just remains in that initial box. Whereas the most valuable writing projects that I've ever done are more like what you described. Like, you kind of get started and you don't necessarily know where it's going, and it kind of takes on uh, an identity or a life of its own. And there's a lot of discovery, in that kind of a process. And you might, I don't know, sometimes when you're just thinking of the process of having to write things down, sometimes, like, you think, like, I know how this is where I'm starting, this is where I'm ending, and I think I know how those things connect. But then you try and get there, and you're like, wait a minute, there's a big gap here in the middle,
yeah.
that I did not realize when it was just in my head. And so then, now I got
Yeah,
to figure out.
and then carrying along an audience with you, right? The
Mhm.
idea of being able to have those connected thoughts, or I'm going to start here and I'm going to finish here, but how do I bring somebody along with me?
Mhm.
Whether it's to convince them or whether just to communicate an idea, man, what a lost art form or seemingly lost art form in our day. Being able to be a storyteller, whether you're telling a story or just telling your story.
Yeah.
Yeah, very helpful. And then, yeah, the the idea of being critiqued afterwards. You know, I I had post publishing. Um, there's some critiques that like holy cow, like I have offended you, or so you say. I have offended you by what and you haven't even got to the offensive chapters yet. That's amazing. Like there are some things that I go, yeah, no, I fully expect to ruffle feathers. The modesty chapter. I expect some people to be ruffled by that, but I offended people and irritated people long before that. I'm like, wow. But taking that critique and measuring that critique, um, because everyone's going to have critiques, right? Somebody's always going to have something to say, good or bad. But learning how to measure that against reality, measure that against what you were trying to do, incorporating that, or learning how to just shield against that, because not every critique, it's like emotions, right? Like emotions are real, but they not always helpful, not always should be listened to. Critiques are much the same way, right? Like the people who felt so offended by what I had to say, like I don't doubt that you feel offended, but that doesn't mean that I was wrong. It could be that you're wrong for taking offense. So the critique kind of circles back around you, but learning how to address that as a communicator, right? Whether it's verbal, whether it's written, it's helpful. It's good.
Yeah.
It's a growing process.
Yep. No, and yeah, we live in a world where, of course, people are it's like their most important human right to be offended by every single thing that happens. Okay, I guess if that's how you want to live, knock yourself out. I found, that the more, I've received a lot of criticism over my time, and I want to take that seriously. I'm sure you did too. Let me listen and say, well, was I being offensive? Are you offended by the way I said this? So could I have said this true thing in a way that was less offensive? Because I know you're not intentionally trying to offend anybody. It's not like you wrote this book to offend people. You wrote it to
Yeah,
edify.
I did. I did write it to 14-year-old girls, right? Like I'm trying to not be offensive,
Right.
but
But people, can get offended. And so I'm sure that you, just like me, will like, all right, well, could I have said this in a different way that would have been better, that wouldn't have been wrong? And that's the editing process. And we don't always make all the right decisions. That's true. You and me both are, uh, we're fallible human beings, just like anybody else. But a lot of the times people that criticize, they've never really done anything. The easiest thing in the world to do is to criticize the work of others and to tear down things that other people have done. And so, I appreciate that you are being productive. You produced something, and
try to.
it's not easy. It's hard. It's real easy for you to go on and criticize everything that everybody else has done. You can go and you could torn down all those other books and all those other resources and go, this is no good. This is no good. This is no good. Like, all right, well, why don't you make one then?
Yeah,
And you
and
did.
I would have been happy to have spent $10 and bought a book and
Sure.
and
Be
passed
way
it out.
easier for you.
We
Right?
way easier. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
But at the end of it, you regret it, or are you happy that you did it?
Oh
I'm
no,
sure
I'm
you're
very
happy you did it.
happy, and I look forward to the next time. As we talked about the resources available on Exalted Christ, and um, you know, little spoiler, little teaser, we're going to do more, right? We're going to do more together. I did this kind of under my own banner, um, but we're going to do more. So I don't know necessarily know what those are, but this won't be my last book for sure.
Did this replace the Proverbs idea for you, or like would you still want to ultimately do that Proverbs kind of more generally for a more general audience?
Oh, I think I'd love to do that. Should that be, um, yeah, no, what I really like doing is teaching the Bible, is expositing the Word, and so this was a way in my mind to approach that task, um, without saying let's sit down and do a Bible study, because
Mhm.
a lot of people, it, it's my perception that getting teenagers, generally speaking, to sit down and do a Bible study with you, like, yeah, really? This is just more digestible. So, should we find an opportunity to, in a market to do that project where we're going through proverb by proverb? Yeah, I'd love that. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
So,
Well, there are lots of good ideas, and you and I have talked about some of those things, and I do look forward to hopefully producing some more additional resources down the road. And this was, I think, a good first one for sure. And I'm glad that you did it. I'm glad that you took the time. I know that writing can often be a very frustrating process. So again, I'm glad that you endured to the end, at least of this project. And I think a valuable resource came out at the end that wouldn't have existed otherwise. And it is true. I guess, who is Greg Churchley, I guess, to listen to him? Well, I mean, who was J.C. Ryle? Who was anybody, right? I mean, these books that have been produced, I think they call it, right, the imposter syndrome. People, a lot of times they go, who am I to, people are going to figure out that I'm nobody.
Yeah.
We're all just nobody.
Spoiler alert, I am nobody.
Yeah, that's true. But, you have perspective that's valuable to share, and certainly Proverbs has perspective that's valuable to share. And again, I think you hit the mark. Is it perfect? No. Proverbs is better. Proverbs Proverbs is better than your book. I know you don't take offense by that.
Not at all.
It stood a much greater test of time. But I think that
more people read it this morning than have read my book total. So
yeah, that's for sure.
That's okay. That's great. Good. Do that.
Yes. Sure. And we agree. Yes and amen. They should do that. But none of the books that I produced are perfect, and they could have been better. But they also.
So, what books have you produced? Let's turn the spotlight onto Joe Kohler. What about your books?
Well, they're all behind me. There's a pile of them here. But the first book I wrote...
Does that say Why I Hate Calvinists? Is that what that
say? Why? No, can you see the other one? There's two of them. There's
I can see colors.
That's a series of books. One says Why I'm Not a Calvinist, written by some Arminians, and then the other one is Why I'm Not an Arminian, written by some Calvinists.
Oh, okay. I thought those were yours.
Though I
know the one below that is yours.
This stack of books right here is mine. Gotcha. These are just some other books, that are back there. But no, I like the Why Am I Not a Calvinist? Why I'm Not a Calvinist and Why I'm Not an Arminian. I encourage people to read both of those books. I did not write either of them, but I think that it's interesting. Even those authors, they said, I'd actually rather write a book of why I am what I am. But the project was to kind of tear down the other position a little bit, or at least explain why they can't hold that particular view. But no, I maybe down the road we'll produce some things because I'm not either. I'm not a Calvinist or an Arminian, and I do think that there is I think there is a need for some renewed focus on this generation, not just kind of clinging to the systems of thought from the past, but all the fruit that has come from the division from these two systems. I don't think that either of them have it completely right, and so I think anyway, maybe one of these days I'll get around to working on that one. But the books that I have written, I've written 6 books. And the first one, Gatecrashers, is just kind of a book about the church in general. That was probably the book that I was most passionate about, if that makes sense. I felt like I had to write that book. That book's like a collector's item now. I don't know, it's hard to get. But I went through Whip and Stock Publishers with that, which is kind of like it's harder to publish with them than it is on Amazon. Anybody can just publish anything on Amazon. They won't just publish anybody's stuff, but I published that one several years ago now. And, there's probably a need to make like a 2.0 version of that at some point. I've thought about that. Maybe making it a little bit more approachable and digestible. My writing style at that time was a lot more like the Apostle Paul's, where I just kind of had really long run-on sentences, and,
Ephesians 1,
at
least
like
verse
just
16
man,
verses.
this entire paragraph is just one long sentence. We probably should I over time I changed my writing style to make it more uh, approachable for just general audiences. But Gatecrashers is again, it's about the church, and
In what way? Like, what does that mean?
um, so it was. I have a passion for the church, which I know a lot of people do. I know you have a passion for the church as well, and being in ministry and kind of just seeing what the modern American church pursues, um, and then what we're actually supposed to be doing. And so it is in some ways a critique of just um, the modern practices, but really it's an expose of what does the Bible actually say that we are supposed to be doing. And the church isn't supposed to be a social club where we gather and just have programming that's made for us. Um, we are we are supposed to be gate crashers. We're supposed to be crashing the gates of Hades. That's Jesus said that his church would expand and that the gates of Hades would not be able to withstand its advance. And so a lot of times the church plays defense. The subtitle of that book is The Offensive Church. Um, and we're supposed to be on offense. And so we're not, I think that the modern church in particular, it's just the church, it's the version of church that I'm the most familiar with because, we can read history books, but I wasn't living in that context. And so even when I say the modern church, I mean the modern North American church. I'm not talking about the church in Iran or China or something like that. Um, it just seems to me that we become so defensive. We try and hide in our buildings and make everything comfortable for Christians, and then we kind of let the world dictate terms. They tell us what issues we're supposed to focus on, and then the church is always responding to whatever the world is saying. And I feel like we're always behind the eight ball, whereas God has given us He's given us a task, marching orders, and we're not just supposed to sit and be blown here and there by every wind and wave that the world throws at us. But we're supposed to take our marching orders from the living head of the church and bring the gospel to the ends of the earth. And so, Gatecrashers is really about that. My preparation for that was rigorous. I was so trepidatious about writing about the church in general, just and writing theology. Like I say, as a sermon, I preach sermons and stuff like that. And but when you write something, and it's just encased now, and I didn't want it to be wrong, and I certainly don't want to lead anybody astray. And so I read my Bible from Genesis to Revelation um, 10 times straight through in 10 months. So it was 40 chapters a day, every single day, no breaks. Um, and so January, read my Bible. February, read the whole Bible. March, read the whole Bible. Did that January through October. And then started writing the book in November, just to make sure that, again, I had a very clear idea in my mind of like, what is the Bible really about? What is the church really for? And that was what came out. So
Would you say how's the tone? Is it polemic and kind of attacking, or is it where would you say falls?
it is it is not a light read. It's a heavy, it's a heavy book.
Scholarly, or
It is. I mean, some people would say it's scholarly. I don't know that scholars would say that. It kind of is in some ways it's a book that missed like every audience because it's not approachable enough to be, a popular book that people would, it's not going to make any Christian bestseller books because, um, you to hit those marks, people's desire to read a book with footnotes and stuff like that. Like that's not popular audiences. So I got a lot of footnotes in there. So you already narrow, you narrow your audience a big that way. But it's heavy on theory, which again, a lot of people aren't interested in. They want it to be very directly applicable. There are very directly applicable things, but it is, it's heavier than most people want. And quite frankly, the Bible is heavier than most people want. And church is actually heavier than most people want. And so, we love to think that church is a place where, we get to have free childcare for our kids and they'll give us a free good cup of coffee. And, there's no real demands on us, for what we just kind of go and we're these passive, passive spectators. Um, that's not what the church is. And so, it's the kind of book that, like you said, you you found some people that were offended by your book. That book is more potentially offensive to many more people, for so many reasons, because and even to me, like I can read that book and I can come under conviction and go, if what the church is supposed to be, what we're supposed to be doing, um, what we're supposed to really be pursuing and aiming at, and we're all supposed to be rowing in this direction. Um, we haven't hit it, and we're not doing it, and so I mean, I think some people, maybe they read this tone and think, oh, you think you've got it all figured out. I'm like, well, no, the Bible has it all figured out. God has it all figured out. He tells us exactly what we ought to do. And then, you know do we really want to say that we're the one generation, like we were doing it all right? Like every generation of people that we read about, right, they needed to be corrected. And
Yeah.
so it shouldn't come as a shock that our generation also needs to be corrected. And um and so my hope was, yes, to be somewhat polemical. I'm writing to people within the church saying, hey, look, we've got these things wrong. It's not really an apologetic to other people outside the church. It's not, I can't imagine a non-Christian wanting to read that. Although certainly non-Christians, they might, they look at, especially like the megachurch movement that it seems to seemingly exist only to enrich pastors and make them rich and famous.
Yeah.
This is much more about going to those who are hurting, and a lot of it's about reaching out to people that, quite frankly, some pastors don't even want in their churches. They don't want people to come in because they're the riffraff and the dirty, the kind of people that Jesus seemed to uh,
Yeah.
spend a lot of time around, and which got him criticized by all the religious folk in his day because he was around the undesirables. So from time to time I thumb through that book, and I'll read parts of it, and um, I I convict myself, even just as I'm reading it. Like I say, that was a that was a book that I had to write. I'm glad that I
So
wrote
with
it.
that, okay, so you had to write it. Did you feel that cathartic release, like when you hit the send button to Amazon and you got your first copy? Okay, I, that's what I needed.
I did. I thought I would never write another book. I thought that was it.
Oh, yeah.
And I was really glad about that, because it was an agonizing process.
Agonizing. Wow, that's a
Oh
strong
yeah,
word.
yeah, yeah. No, I
Because of the content, or because of just doing it was agonizing, or because writing it in long run-on sentences was hard even for you?
no, that part was easy.
Oh,
Actually, I still write that way, and like my other books that have shorter sentences and stuff, I write the book and then I have to go back and like completely rewrite it.
that's a hard way to do it, brother.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's a more enjoyable product for people at the end. But
I just
no,
meant if you did it that way in the first place, it'd be
sure. Well, that's not how I think, though. I think in
okay.
the much longer run-on sentences,
Yeah.
and then I got to go back and make it more digestible.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was, I don't know, just the heaviness of it, the seriousness with which I approached it, um, the it's a lot of the same stuff you were talking about. Just agonizing, like there's got to be a better way to say this, or am I leaving something out, or am I missing something? Um, all of that stuff. It was like, once you're finally, there was a part of me that would still be working on it, would still be editing it, because there is no end to the editing process. So eventually, you just have to be like, it's close enough now. Um,
I still have
and
an email. I still have an email from one of my editors where they hadn't got a chance to read the last, or one of my last chapters. So after I'd hit the send button and people were already buying copies, they sent me an email. Hey, here's my markups for this chapter. It's still unread in my inbox today. And it's like, if you know my inbox, I don't have unread messages
yeah.
except that one where I've went, I don't want to know what you found. I'm done.
Yeah. So there's that like laying down of that weight, and I know you've preached. I know you preached very recently, but when
Yeah.
you preach, like that same kind of like mental, like you're holding this in your mind, and you have this kind of
Yeah.
project, and then you lay it down. A book is a longer process of that, because it's not just a week-long process, or month-long process, or whatever. But several months. I can't remember exactly how long it took me to write that book. Um, it was several months. I think I probably actually did the writing it was less than a year to actually write it. Um, and again, the majority of the process, that preparation, of just reading through the Bible at that pace was exhausting in and of itself. I mean, it was
I
a
imagine.
rigorous process, but I mean, that was so helpful for me in so many ways. And I would strongly recommend that to almost anybody. Although I know that,
You'd recommend once a month for 10 months?
oh my goodness, the amount of dots that got connected, that, because I mean, you think about like some people, they stick to like the Bible in a year, like 3
Yep.
chapters a day. You read
Yep.
your Bible, I think, in a year at that process. Um, and so, December, you're finishing Revelation. January, you were reading Genesis. There's just no way you're remembering all that stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas, if I'm reading the last page of Revelation on January 31st or whatever, and I just read Genesis on January 1st, um, it's much easier to keep those things in mind and to remember them.
Sure.
And of course, it's like drinking from the fire hydrant, um, for the first time, second time, third time, fourth time. But then again, you're just there's dots that are getting connected. You're like, oh man, like I'm noticing stuff that I never noticed before. Like I've read this, I'd read my
Sure.
Bible a lot. I already, I,
How
you know,
long ago was this? How long has the book been published?
oh boy, I can't remember. I get so bad with that stuff.
I mean, it would have been before 2013, so at least 10 years.
Yeah. I mean, I'd already read my Bible a bunch. I'd already graduated from seminary. So I was already familiar with the Bible, but even so, having a master's degree in studying the Bible, reading lots and lots of books about the Bible, having read the Bible cover to cover, I don't know. I mean, a lot. I'd already read it many, many, many times. Still, that was maybe one of the most important
Hmm.
formative things that I've ever done,
Wow.
of helping me to understand the Bible to the, I still have a lot more to learn, but I mean, I did not want to be wrong about,
Yeah.
and so I was reading it to correct, like I wasn't just searching for proof texts to make my point. I was like, Lord, all these things that I have in my mind, like, is that what you're saying? Or, I'm looking to be disproven. I'm looking for verses that are going to, you know, make the opposite case. I'm looking for verses that are going to say something different than what I'm trying to talk about. But as it turns out, God is really serious about His name being proclaimed to the ends of the earth. He is really serious about all of His people who are called by His name, pulling in that direction. He is really serious about, the giftings that He's given us. It's not just to make a name for ourselves; it's that we would edify one another and evangelize the world. And yeah, again, I'm thankful for it, even if nobody else ever reads it.
Well, that was my next question. Okay, so again, it has to have been out more than a decade
mm,
because I mean it was written when I met you. I'm quite certain. Um, what fruit? Like, can you, besides the fruit in your own life, has it borne fruit?
it has, I mean, there are some people that have certainly purchased it. This book is not one that I've probably gotten the most feedback from. Certainly, some of my other books are more widely read, but probably the most prominent fruit. I think it was published in 2015. Is that right?
Was it really? I thought you had that and the Forgotten Officer out when we met. So
Hmm. Um,
I could be. It all blurs.
yeah, it does for sure. Uh, but the majority of the fruit, I think, has been just in my own personal ministry. I mean, I'm a pastor of a church, and so um, this is not, again, it's not just theory. Like exercising that theory and putting it into practice has, so anybody who's benefited from my personal ministry, my pastoral ministry, my teaching ministry, um, who's benefited from the service projects that we've done, the evangelism that we've done, all of that stuff. Again, I wouldn't be the person that I am today if I hadn't read Gatecrashers, um, or excuse me, written that book, because it was just so formative for me. And I'd been in pastoral ministry for a while, and there were just certain things that I was just so frustrated by, and And probably a lot of pastors, that have served in ministry, some of the stuff that we talked about in our lessons learned, in ministry, people get burned out. And a lot of it's because this is going to sound harsh, but you're wasting your time. Like, you're wasting your time focused on something that it just doesn't matter. Um, and so when you have to have another deacon meeting where people are arguing at each other's throats about, what color to paint the children's sanctuary, and you're banging your head in your wall going like, is this what ministry is? Well, it's not really. And stop tolerating it. Like, what are you even doing? Who cares? This stuff doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What really matters is the fact that there are people that are under the wrath of God, perishing for lack of knowledge, and that we have the information that could literally save their souls if we go out and proclaim it to them. And so it's the whole, Paul said, how can they believe on him whom they have not heard of? And how will they hear unless someone preaches? And how will they preach unless they are sent? And as it turns out, we have been sent. And so, like I say, probably more people than I realize have been touched by it, simply just because of the fact that, I've been a part of church ministry for a long time. And a lot of people have been affected, in ways that I don't realize. We'll never know the full value, of course, of anything that we did until we stand before the Lord someday.
Yeah, I would admit that it's quite obvious in my life that I've been affected by your ministry, and so many of the many of the ideas that I've adopted from you, whether directly from that book or not. So there are people on this side of the state being affected by that work. So
yeah. So the amount of people that have read it is, I don't know, probably pretty small. Like you said, I get my tax forms that I have to put in there. And I'm like, I must have sold some books, but
that's cute,
but not very many. I make a hilarious amount of money per sale on that. It's like really, really funny.
yeah.
So, but like I say, I didn't necessarily write it to get rich, and thank God, because I sure didn't.
Mission accomplished.
I wrote it because I had to, and I never wanted to write that book. And as soon as it was done, yes, I did. I had some relief, and I thought, man, I'm never writing again. And
what changed your mind?
I don't know. You get passionate about certain things. Then Forgotten Officer was the next book, and I was talking to people, and it just seemed like if we had this written down in book form, that would be better. It would be more effective, and it has been. I mean, that book has definitely been more effective. That one is certainly more widely read. That one is probably my most well-known book. Again, I'm not a well-known author by any means, but that book is making its way into certain circles that I never would have gotten into by me just continuing to talk with people about it.
Yeah.
And the season of life and ministry that was I was doing a part of a parachurch organization for a little while that started with another brother in Christ, and we were super frustrated. That was just a very frustrating season of life. We thought that ministry would be extremely well received, and it was not. We had the organization. I know you know this, but for anybody's watching, the long and short of it was our parachurch organization existed to come alongside already established local churches and to try and help them become more active in personal evangelism. So, we would talk to local pastors, and most local pastors would admit, yeah, we could be more active in evangelism. It's hard to get people active in evangelism. And so we were two full-time people that were willing to become basically full-time staff members for any local church that would have us for free to them. We didn't charge any money for our services. All of our funding was, came from somewhere else. And our exclusive purpose would be to teach and model and encourage and plan events and get people equipped to evangelize.
And how many churches took advantage of that?
Very few. Very, very few. It was so funny how many people we would talk to, we'd even say things like, hey, how's it going in evangelism? Oh, we could do better. Why don't you? Well, we don't have the time or whatever. Or it's, we tried and it kind of didn't work. And I was like, yeah. Do you think it would be helpful if you had like maybe a full-time person to oversee? Like, yeah, in a perfect world, we would. Like, well, why don't you? Well, budget, blah, 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 and all these kind of things. Like, well, what if we did it for you for free for as long as you needed, and then hopefully try to raise somebody up and they'd like, get out of my office. What just happened? But I think the secret is, or the dirty secret is that a lot of people actually don't want that much evangelism going on. Not real evangelism, because people get offended when the gospel's preached, and um, sometimes people that are rough around the edges respond to the gospel, and then these people maybe make us uncomfortable when they start coming to church. I've seen that. I've seen that happen. Um, and some pastors are afraid they're going to lose their job because they know that the people don't want to do it. And then maybe they had a season where they were telling people, "Hey, evangelism is important, and the Great Commission it's not a suggestion, it's a command." And people get bothered because they're like, "Quit talking about this. Go. We want a Dave Ramsey course. We don't want an evangelism course." Um, so the reasons are varied. Um, but it was extremely frustrating. Of course, we were younger, much younger then. I looked much younger then. Nobody wanted to listen. Especially most of the pastors are older than me. None of them want to listen to this, kid coming in telling them. They took it as criticism. It wasn't. We were genuinely trying to serve them and to come alongside them and try and take a burden off of their plate. It wasn't always received that way, and uh, I'm sure we didn't present it, perfectly. So it's not all their fault. But uh, we figured if we had a book, that would maybe.
Easier to drop a book on a pastor's desk than it is sit there and tell them.
And it's funny. It's funny the difference. It's still coming from me. But let's say I show up at your office unannounced and I just say, "Hey, Pastor, how you doing? How's evangelism?" And they're like, "Yeah, it could be better." And like, "Well, do you want us to help you?" You can take that as like a personal attack.
Yeah.
Whereas if you read the book, now I guess you're like active in the solution because you read it. Like you're like you actually turned the pages, and now you like if you present it, you're like, "I read this book and I think we should do this," and so that makes a difference. And it's true. I'm not immune to that. I've read lots of books, and I will often receive the information from that book in a different way than if someone knocks on my door unsolicited and is just like, "Hey, you could do better at this." I'm like, "Who are you? Mind your own business." So a book, is just a more it is a more approachable format, and then that has allowed it to make its way, slowly at first, and it's still slow. I mean, but it is definitely made its way. Like I've been contacted from people all across the United States that have somehow read that book and been influenced by that book. And
So why the title, The Forgotten Officer? Like, I mean, go out and evangelize. Why? What's the connection there?
Yeah, so the first book, Gatecrashers, is about what the church is supposed to do, and one of the reasons why I think we don't do that is because of this kind of forgotten officer, which I believe that Ephesians 4:11-16 is very clear that Jesus, the risen Christ, gave as a gift to his church, and it's the office of evangelist. So why don't people go out and evangelize? It's because we've forgotten this officer of the local church evangelist. And chapter 8 in that book, I think it's chapter 8, kind of goes through. I read every commentary I could find. I mean, there's more, of course. I didn't read every single one, but I read every commentary I could find. I went to my old seminary library and was looking at all the views that at least are represented by the majority of commentaries and things of what evangelists are. Nobody agrees on what they are. And I say that term, everybody thinks they know what it is, but if you start talking with people.
Yeah, you think of these big national names that go around and have
Sure.
revel meetings and stuff. So,
so Billy Graham is an evangelist to some people. For other people, they think they think they're church planners. Other people think that there's some reformed history that they thought that they thought one way about it, and there's these other views that there was I think eight really common views that came up that every single time my ministry partner and I were talking with people, one of these would come up, and they're all the things that are represented based on the books that people read in seminary and just the ideas that they have. And I found that just talking, I mean, I literally talked with maybe not 1,000 pastors, but probably hundreds of leaders, across different contexts, and just kept getting the same thoughts about what they thought evangelists were. And really, none of it was biblical. And people are shocked to find that the Bible actually says more about evangelists than it does about pastors. And yet our churches are so dominated by pastors. And I am a pastor. I love pastors. But this office of evangelist, we've kind of pushed them out, and we've made them something that they're not, just like we've made pastors something that they're not. Like the idea of a CEO celebrity pastor that never spends any time with their people. Like the imagery is a shepherd and their sheep. What kind of shepherd spends no time with the sheep? What kind of shepherd is unknown to the sheep, that the people that go to your church can't even meet with you?
I know of
access
a
you.
pastor in my area who has a security team on Sunday morning to keep the people at an appropriate distance away.
Just like any other normal pastor
Just
has,
like
has
any
a security team to keep the sheep away from him. Get away from me. Yeah. So, I mean, maybe there's some good reason for that I'm unaware of, but
there's not.
it doesn't seem to keep with the imagery. So, but evangelists are very important. And I think that, the reason that most local churches are divided with other churches in the area, that we are not doing what Gatecrashers talks about, of being a unified body that is seeking to reach the world with the gospel of Christ. Instead, we have local churches on every corner that are so focused on trying to build their own little mini kingdoms, and we hire pastors, and we want them to have some fresh new vision for what it is that we're supposed to do. To me, all this is nonsense. Like, this is just we've completely deviated, and we've forgotten that the head of the church is still alive and well. Jesus Christ is still firmly seated on his throne. And so if I die today, the local church that I lead shouldn't be looking for some other leader to take us in some new direction, because the direction doesn't come from me. I'm not the head. And so, pastors have forgotten this. Pastors think that they're the head, and they think that then we come along and we're, whatever our emphases are, that, that's the only thing that matters. And then you find that local churches are, more often than not, the people that attend there are more conformed to the image and likeness of the pastor than they are conformed to the image and likeness of the shepherd that we should be conformed to. It's Christ himself. And when you have both a pastor and an evangelist working together, as I believe Christ designed, which I think is very just clearly taught in the scriptures. And again, the book is an expose of that, and it does critique all the other views that I think are wrong, and explains why I think that they're wrong, and then presents a more biblical view that
give your
doesn't
give your 30-second pitch then for a local evangelist, a local church evangelist.
Sure. So the passages that the Bible has that actually talks about these guys, seems that an evangelist is more like an elder of a local church than a traveling person. And so the idea that the church simply exists as an organism that has two main purposes, an internal purpose and an external purpose, it doesn't seem unreasonable that Jesus would have given an overseer of the internal purpose and an overseer of the external purpose. And then when we read about every local church in the New Testament that has a plurality of elders, to me, that's the simplest explanation of why. You think of some small churches, you'd say, well, why would we need more than one pastor? Well, you don't, but you need a pastor and an evangelist, because the work of the church, you never want to forget the internal or the external purpose. It's like the wings of an airplane. The left wing and the right wing one's not more important than the other, but if you don't have them both, you can't fly. And so now modern local churches have completely forgot one of the wings of the airplane. I think some pastors are actually probably evangelists, but they're masquerading as pastors. These are probably the guys that are, all they want to do is preach the gospel every Sunday, and they don't care about counseling anybody. And people leave the church because they're like, we had some marriage problem and this guy won't meet with us. He doesn't care. He's just like, all he wants to do is preach the gospel. And every Sunday is outreach Sunday, and every Sunday it's just always about inviting people so he can preach the gospel every single Sunday.
And you say those things like, I mean, you're putting a tone on it that says those are bad, but
no, I think it's a good thing.
It's only the exclusivity that you're saying is a bad thing.
Well, it's a bad thing because they're masquerading as a pastor. And in fact, if they stopped pretending to be a pastor, which they aren't, and were free to be an evangelist, then instead of them trying to do it all, imagine that they did this. Imagine that instead of trying to make everything about people inviting their friends to church, he actually equipped all the people. More evangelism would happen. And so he would actually be more effective in the thing that he wants. More people would be reached. And if you stop ignoring the reality that, sometimes people do need biblical counsel in their marriage. Sometimes people do need, like, that stuff that's not stupid or a waste of time. That's an important thing. But maybe you're not the person to do it, and that's okay. And how many people, like, they leave churches like that, and they're they criticize these guys because they're being forced to fill a role that they're not actually supposed to be filling, and so it's just not good for them. So yeah, I'm not trying to say that with a tone where I think that approach is bad, but like I would hate um, for anybody in the body of Christ to be put into a seat and left in a seat that they don't belong in. That's just not good for them. It's not good for anybody. Um, and so, and then likewise, there are pastors that they think the only thing that matters is doing more and more and more and more studies. And that's why we create people that, like, they go from church to church and they have stacks and stacks and stacks of notes. But are they even living a Christian life? Is that what Jesus called us to do? Did he call us to go into all the world and fill up all the notebooks with notes? That's not. And I say that as I love Bible studies. I love filling up notebooks, with notes. But that's not what he called us to do. That's got to lead to something. And so anytime you don't have both of these things working together, things, they get dysfunctional.
Yeah.
So
So in the American church, especially, it's only Churchley that I know have a little bit of exposure outside the American church. We give people, you've been renamed. You're not Joe anymore. You're Pastor Joe. Would you say that we ought to have evangelist Bill? Like, should we, morning, Pastor Joe and evangelist Bill? Would you would you go so far?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't really like that approach. I mean, people can just call me Joe. That's fine. I don't need to be called Pastor Joe. But the titles, these biblical titles, they are important. And, I know that there are some people, and I deal with that. It's one of the things people say, no, we shouldn't, the church isn't supposed to have these titles. Well, it's the Bible that uses those titles. And, you can't have elders that you don't know who they are. They're not identified. But do I need to be called Elder Joe, Pastor Joe, or Evangelist so and so? Like I'm not big on that personally. But to have the people who fill these offices be identified as that, like the fact that I am the pastor of the church that I shepherd, I think that is important because people need to know who is overseeing this, and I mean, if things are awry, who's accountable? I'm the one who's accountable. And if things need to be changed, like, I'm the person who sits in that seat. So that is important. And likewise, if the evangelism stuff isn't working, like, I think that the evangelist should be identified as that, whether everybody addresses them as evangelist so and so. Like,
I just find that whole
ridiculous.
thing funny. Like nobody comes up to me and they're like, "Oh, Engineer Greg." Like,
Yeah,
that's awkward. Don't do that.
Yeah.
If you walk into most churches, and my church isn't really any different. People hear me referring to my hey, morning, Steve. Like, oh, does he not respect him? No, I respect him a lot. But I don't.
That's why I don't call him dummy. Yeah.
Well, at least
if I didn't respect him, I'd call him dummy. But that's his name. Yeah. No. People, obviously, everybody's got different backgrounds and stuff, and so some people do call me Pastor Joe every single time they talk to me, and I'm not going to make them stop. But for people that call me Joe, I mean, that's my name. So you can call me Joe.
I mean, I was asking that half in jest, obviously, but now we should extend it to Evangelist Bill or whoever it is.
Yeah, no, I don't think that we have to go that far. Certainly, if people do that, that's fine. But again, my assessment in the cases made in the book, most people that call themselves evangelists aren't really. A lot of people that call themselves pastors aren't really. A lot of people that call themselves apostles and prophets aren't really. And so
all people who currently call themselves apostles aren't really. So
agreed. Yeah, and so I do make that case, in the book, but we want to correctly identify genuine apostles and prophets. Fortunately, we have their writings in the Bible. That's the foundation for every local church. And then every local church also has been given, I believe, gifts from Christ. Christ has at least given enough gifts that every church would be able to have adequate oversight of both the internal and external missions of the church, so that you can have both wings of the church operating correctly. And it creates a synergy that the best pastor without an evangelist is missing out. And likewise, the best evangelist without a pastor is missing out. Whereas once they're working together, creates a synergy that is supernatural. And um, a lot of times people think that they're supposed to do both, or they try and weigh that burden down. You can't. It's hard enough to do either one by itself. And
I think once the one, if we've learned nothing else from the last 100 years of church history, it's that trying to make the pastor wear all of the hats that we currently do
mm,
is a complete train wreck.
yes, yep. So, as we said before, it's really easy to criticize other things. A lot of people criticize the church. That's not my goal. I don't want to talk bad about the bride of Christ. I love the church. And I think we, as Christians, we ought to love the church. And so we ought to pay very careful attention to what the scriptures say about it. And, I'm not the first to make this observation. Lots of people have said, if you just sit down and read the Bible, you think, man, look what these people are doing, and look at what the church is supposed to be. And then you look up from the pages of the Bible and you look at what we've created, they're not the same. And that's pretty obvious. And so,
one is inferior and one is superior.
yes.
Yeah.
And
it's not just different. It's a difference with qualitatively.
Yeah. I've told this story before, but I remember a pastor. He's no longer alive, but he was a friend of mine, a mentor of mine. And, I especially as a younger man in ministry, I have all this energy and desire to see the whole world, be reached with the gospel. And he told me, I don't think I'll ever forget it. He just looked me right in the face after listening to me talk for a while. He just said, Joe, I think you just got to lower your expectations.
Hmm.
I was like, man, lower my expectations? I have to lower my expectations? And I understand what he was talking about, and he was trying to save me from burnout. And in many ways, he was 100% correct.
Yeah.
My expectations are too high on a lot of things, and I get frustrated and I get, disappointed. But I read in Ephesians that God is able to do abundantly beyond all that we can ask or think. And I'm like, that's the exact opposite sentiment. Like, I should have the highest of aspirations and the highest of expectations of what the church can do. And then I should expect that God could do abundantly beyond. And when I look at a church that, again, people are just, they think it's their job to criticize this hireling that they pay, and criticize all of his sermons, and criticize his Bible studies, or he's not dynamic enough, or he preaches too long, or he doesn't preach long enough, or he doesn't tell enough jokes, or he tells too many jokes, or all this stuff. Like, what in the world are we even doing? What's the point? And so I put forth a positive case to say, not only do I think I know what the problem is, it's never going to get fixed unless we have the right leaders to do it. And fortunately, Jesus loves his church enough to give these leaders. He tells us about these leaders. And there's a leader that literally the Bible talks about 3 times as much as the only leader that we care about, pastors. And then we've taken evangelists and we've pushed them out. Basically, it made them parachurch ministers at best. And it's not working. And again, it's not to say that there's not fruit from some of these ministries. Of course there are. But could it be better? Could we be more fruitful? And I think the answer, we all agree, well, sure, there's some way that we could be more fruitful, more productive. And again, whether people agree with me or don't, Forgotten Officer is the case that puts forth like a very positive case, I believe to be thoroughly biblical. Like you, I've heard a lot of criticism. I've heard a lot of people tell me that they don't agree, or that they're not compelled, or that they don't think we need to do this. Unlike many of the positions that I have not had anybody actually tell me why I'm wrong, which is significant. I've had a lot of people who won't talk to me about it, but an actual, like when you and I disagree about something, you can tell me why you think I'm wrong, what you think I'm misinterpreting. This is more straightforward. Like I say, most people just say, well, you didn't make your case strong enough. Okay, that's fine. That's fair. And maybe that's true. But the way that these other things,
so make your counter case then.
I'll give you an example. I'll talk to a pastor who says, I think that an evangelist is a church planner. And I go, okay, that's a common view. I understand. I say, why do you think that? And they'll tell me, oh, I just, that's how I think of it. I go, okay. So let's just run through the biblical data real fast. Do you remember where, and this won't be hypothetical, rhetorical. I'll ask you the question. I'll put you like, that's your view, for example.
Sure. Yeah. Put it to
Where
me.
was
Let's go.
Timothy when Paul wrote to Timothy? Where was Timothy?
Ephesus, I believe.
He was in Ephesus.
Yeah.
And so Paul wrote to Timothy, and he told him to do the work of an evangelist while he was there at Evangelist.
In an established church.
The church was already planted there.
Yeah.
So he was not, the work of an evangelist was not to plant the church in Ephesus, because the church was already planted. So if you think that an evangelist is a church planter, that's fine. But clearly that's not what the biblical work of an evangelist is, because that's not what
at least in that instance, right? Yeah. I mean, it definitely can't be excluded to church planter.
So when people say, that's, and there's reasons for it, the scholarly resource TDNT says that that's what, evangelists were, and there's early in church history, there's some people that say that's what the work of an evangelist is, and that's fine. But that's uninspired. The inspired record is the Apostle Paul, who wrote Ephesians 4:11, talking about evangelists, tells Timothy to do the work of an evangelist while he's left him there at Ephesus to work on the church that's already planted. So, in my opinion, you cannot say that evangelists are church planners, because that's not what he was telling Timothy to do. And then that's usually when people tell me to get out of their office. So, because they'd rather maintain a position, and they didn't want to refute what I said, or they couldn't, and they just didn't want to continue the conversation. And again, I'm not trying to fight with you. I'm not trying to be problematic. Church planting is a very important thing. We planted a church. The church that we planted 10 years ago is, still in existence. And I think that the work of church planting is a good work. But why can't we just call church planners? And why do we have to pretend that they're evangelists if they're not? If evangelists are something else, can't we just, talk about what an evangelist is?
I hear your argument, and I go, man, I feel the same way about missionaries, right? Like I don't know, we will make an excuse to call just about anything missionary work, except, what missionaries really are and what their purpose were in the New Testament. So
yeah. So, anytime you take something that is genuinely from God and is a good thing, and we take that and we redefine it, it's going to be worse. God's not going to go, oh, I wish I would have thought of it.
I would. Yeah. I thought
you guys did better than I did. Like, that's not how God works. So, it would be good for us to capture and recapture the actual biblical positions. And I'm not trying to create something new. That's what people think I'm trying to do, maybe. But the idea that pastors are the heads of all these local churches is just, it's not leading anywhere good. And when you have genuine plurality of eldership, like we see illustrated in every single local church in the New Testament, without exception, and we see the potency, a big part of that book is talking about the potency of the churches that Paul planted. Paul planted just a handful of churches, and they reached the entire Greco-Roman Empire. Within 300 years, basically, even under severe persecution, there were so many Christians in the Roman Empire. And that was especially near the end, the Roman government was trying to kill them as fast as they could. And the number of people was just growing. And now we have so many churches in America, and we are just not reaching the lost. Something has gone really wrong. And when I say we're not reaching them, I'm not even talking about people getting converted. I'm talking about people literally have no idea what the message of Christianity even is. And we're so busy fighting about, is this particular thing a sin or is it not?
Calvinism and Arminianism.
Yeah, we fight about all this stuff, and literally people have no idea what the message of the gospel really is. And again, I say that from experience. I've talked to a lot of people, and you try and get people to articulate what they think the gospel is. You get some really strange results. Of course, some people know, but very few. And people have so many different ideas about who Jesus is, because quite frankly, that's our fault, because we have Christians, people who call themselves Christians, saying some of this, we talk about Jesus completely differently, you know? Um, and we're not with one heart and with one voice, um, giving a unified testimony. We're giving a disparate, different, just it's all over the map. So
Yeah. Yeah.
evangelist would be a big uh, uh, recapturing that would be a big step in the right direction, I believe. Would it solve every single problem? Of course not. But there is a systemic problem in the church, and we have we've created something that is not biblical. And that's
So
my,
okay.
like I said, that was my case to try and fix the
Yeah.
fix the
So
underlying problem.
your first two books, you've you've probably managed to offend just about everybody at this point.
Sure, yeah.
What could you possibly have gone on to say in your your last four? Was it, you say, six total?
Yeah. So I wrote I've got devotional study guides. Two of the books are that. So one's on John's Gospel. It's called Come, Believe, Follow. And then one on the book of Acts, Witnesses to the Ends of the Earth. And so I actually have a plan, to publish something on every single book in the Bible, a devotional study guide of that sort. So that's two of the other ones, and then I wrote a book on prayer, faithful in prayer, which was probably actually the most challenging book to me personally, which was unexpected. But that one took on a complete life of its own, which was really neat. I was so convicted about my own prayer life, while writing that book, and just the how just out of God's priorities sometimes my prayers were, because I'm so focused on the things that I see and the things that I think are important, and of course Jesus's um, prayer, the Our Father prayer, is very, very much studied. Um, so I don't know that I was world shaking with my analysis of the first part of it, but the part that's most valuable in that book, in my opinion, is I went from beginning to end in Scripture, and I didn't include every inspired prayer that's in the Scriptures, but after explaining the principles that I believe Jesus was teaching in the Our Father prayer, because I grew up repeating that prayer and just doing exactly what he said not to do, just meaninglessly repeating it,
Yeah.
but actually understanding the underlying principles that he was teaching. And I don't think he was telling them that prayer to just repeat it and say it as a mantra, but to understand this is the way in which you are to pray, and these are the priorities that you ought to have. And so then, kind of seeing prayers from the Old Testament and the New Testament, that these inspired prayers, they didn't always include all of the priorities, but they hit these main priorities. And like once you start to see that underlying foundation, you start to go like, man, sometimes I read these prayers, like I read the prayer of Solomon, the dedication of the temple. It's like, man, this is an awesome prayer. And I'm so glad that God inspired this to be recorded, and I can read this. And I'm like, this is so much more substantive than some of the prayers that I've, prayed, like, rub-a-dub-dub, God, thanks for the grub, just, give us traveling mercies, help us to be safe, as we go to the football game or whatever. These ideas of really praying that God's name would be glorified in all the earth, that people would fear him, reverence him, worship him, turn to him. You know, and it's just kind of seeing those priorities. It really turned on a lot of light bulbs for me, and it substantively changed my prayer life, I think, for the better. And that's probably been the book that has been most well received. That's probably the least controversial. That's the one that, I mean, almost anybody. If I've offended you, don't read the other books, I guess, but read the prayer book. It's challenging, and it's very much influenced by the same things that were in those other books. Like even when he talks about at the end, like, lead us not into temptation. If you understand like the flow of thought of those priorities, the temptation is to live in ways that aren't focused on glorifying God's name to the end of the earth. And I've said this recently from the pulpit, and I've said this to others, and again, I don't mean it to be offensive, but if you're a Christian, and if you think Christianity means that you go to church on Sunday, but then the rest of your life, for the most part, is indistinguishable from all of your unsaved friends and family members and coworkers. Like if you're all pursuing the same things, like you're all you care about is what, when the newest season of your favorite show is going to come out, and what your next vacation is going to be, and how, what the amount of money in your retirement account is, and just what activities you guys are going to do on the weekend. If you're just thinking about all the same stuff as everybody else, you've probably substantively and fundamentally misunderstood what Christianity really is. And so then when we sometimes misunderstand those, again, the building priorities that Jesus was talking about, and keeping the main things first, then a prayer like, Lord, lead us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil, takes on a whole new meaning, because it's not just like, deliver me from that one particular sin that I know I'm really prone to doing, or it's actually, Lord, deliver me from living in a way that fails to prioritize glorifying your name to the ends of the earth. And a lot of Christians would go, well, what part do I play in that? I'm not a pastor, or I'm not an author, or I'm not an evangelist, or I'm not a whatever. Every single Christian is supposed to pray this way, and every single Christian is supposed to participate in some way in glorifying God's name to the ends of the earth. And many people are not living that. They're not living that way, and that's why we don't pray that way. It's why we pray like, Lord, my dog's sick. Can you please help him to feel better? And my we have these things that are heavy on us, and they matter. Of course they matter. I'm not saying that they don't matter, but the bigger things, the more substantive things, like the fact that there are people who've never heard of Jesus, that's the stuff that's really supposed to be on our minds. And it's
do the greater without ignoring the lesser.
Yes, you got it. And so we can pray for those things, and also pray for my family member who's sick, and pray for, whatever. Like but we've so focused on the me-centered stuff, and the stuff that is, my world. And we forget that the world of our Father that He's made, and that He's called us to something bigger than ourselves, something that began before us and will most likely carry on after we're gone, and it has effects into eternity. We're supposed to live for that, with a view to that, not just a view to my retirement years or whatever. We're supposed to look further out. So, and then the last one is every word, read your Bible in 90 days. Like I said, I think everybody would probably benefit if they read their Bible in once a month. That's an exhausting
tall
pace,
task.
and many people would have to like quit their jobs or something to do that. So, but you could do the Bible in 90 days, and a lot of people object to that because they think it's too fast. They think I'm not going to get everything out of it. Well, here's the real secret: you're never going to get everything out of it.
Yeah.
So going slower is one valuable thing, and there are times to go slow, and we should go slow from time to time. But going faster is something that a lot of people never do, and as a result of that, they're so focused on the trees that they never see the forest. And it's good for us to see the forest every once in a while. So I've gone through the Bible from beginning to end with a lot of people. It's been one of the most rewarding parts of my time in ministry. I preached so many sermons that people have forgotten, but everybody that I've had opportunity. What'd you say?
I said never. They'd never. They're so profound and
no, very forgettable sometimes. But everybody who's taken the time to actually sit down and make the commitment with me at whatever pace we've gone, because I've gone at different paces with lots of different people, sometimes in smaller groups, sometimes individually. But everybody who's made that commitment to sit down and say, I'm gonna read every single word from Genesis to Revelation. We're gonna meet consistently. We're gonna stick to a pace. Everybody who's done that, it's been a positive, life-changing type of experience in some way, shape, or form. Not again, doesn't solve every problem, but it's never not been worth it. And I love it because I get to, sometimes I'm doing it with somebody who's never, there's books that they've never read, and so I can't wait to see what's standing out to them. I can't wait to hear what questions they've got. Sometimes they have done it before, but they've some people have read the Bible a couple of times, but they've just never gone at that fast of a pace. And so again, see the connections, kind of the light bulb moments going on for them. They're like, oh, I read this and I remembered this, or, I was reading this.
That's some of my favorite memories, for the people that I have had a chance to work with and disciple and walk with. We study the Bible together, and watching those light bulbs go on, there are a couple instances coming to mind of, I didn't realize it was saying this. So it
It's
definitely
beautiful.
is. It is beautiful. It's great.
And so I wrote that book basically just to be a resource that, like, similar to other things, like I can't meet with everybody, but sometimes people, they're like, I want to read my whole Bible, but I don't know how to do it. I just need a plan. So I'm like, all right, well, here's a plan. And then it's kind of organized like a workout kind of a thing, So like I would
Like P90X for your Bible. Is that what it
exactly,
is?
yeah,
Yeah.
kind of like that.
Yeah.
And so the idea is, I give sometimes I give some thoughts like as a warm up, just to kind of like get your mind in the right, like this is what this
Mm.
book is about, or this is what, kind of things to pay attention to. Like for Leviticus, I'm like, kind of mind your footing. Like these are the types of things that people stumble over. And then as they're reading, I've got these parts. They're called form check. So like check your forms, make sure you're like, did you notice this thing? Did you notice this?
Mm.
Obviously, certain things are going to stand out to you as you're reading it, but there's benefit from somebody who's gone through the Bible a lot. I benefited from that when I was a younger Christian, of having people who knew the Bible when I didn't know it very well, kind of pointing things out to me and saying, pay attention to this, or did you notice this, or did you see this? What do you think about that? And so there's a couple spots where I'm like, this came up. You're going to want to remember this for later. Like, just keep this in mind.
Well, when we did that, I appreciated, I had read through my Bible a number of times before you and I did, as part of the program we were doing. But I really appreciated the interrogation and what do you think about that?
Mm.
That's always what I love. I think we'd always start out those sessions and do you have anything? Nope, just go ahead, fire away. Like, let me, because, what I think about generally isn't as interesting to me as being interrogated about
Hmm.
thing. Yeah. So
Yeah. So, the book kind of is that the opportunity to have some of my thoughts about some of the things that, I would try and point out. And of course, if you just read every word without reading the Bible, it's not a, doesn't make any, it's not really making any sense.
yeah.
So it's intended to be a companion for somebody who is trying to read the Bible and really trying to understand. And like, because at this point in my life, I have a pretty good idea of the overall message of the scriptures. And so, especially for someone who's just not as familiar, like, these are some big things that you're going to want to kind of keep in mind. And as you're continuing to read it, and you'll see like, oh yeah, like I'm seeing this strand literally runs from beginning to end. And I'm it's easy to miss that. And sometimes you're so overwhelmed by the strange names and strange geographical places, and you get so bogged down in the genealogies and stuff like that. Um, but when you understand the bigger picture, then you start to understand, like, well, why are there genealogies? And like, as a new covenant believer, like, what is the point of Leviticus? And like, is there benefit to this book even for us as modern believers? And there is. It's not
Mhm.
that we're supposed to be doing sacrifices and stuff, but part of it's just, you get so overwhelmed by all the stuff that they had to do to try and maintain this dangerous blessing of the presence of God, and then we realize what Christ has done for us to make it so easy for us to approach God in Christ.
Yeah.
We could just worship Him and say, "Thank you that you've made this so uh, easy, and that you fulfilled all these righteous requirements." I mean, you've God is holy and He's dangerous to approach outside of Christ. But in Christ, we have this boldness now to be able to come to Him because of grace. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Um, so stuff like that. So that's all of them. That's all the books. And
Cool.
there's probably more books to write. I have a lot of things that do weigh
Well, I
heavily
know
on
what I
me.
want you to write next. So
Which one?
I would really love to see, you wrote that, was it 4-part series on the kingdom of God?
It was,
And
yeah, six
oh, was it
articles on
6?
the website, I think.
Oh, I
Yeah.
only read 4, I'm sure. No, just kidding. I just forgot it was 6. That is primed for writing a book on. So
It's already book length.
it is it is book length.
I'm
So
teaching that class again right now. Now it's
okay.
a 4-week class. It was a 6-week class before. I'm teaching that class again right now, and I've made some additions and expansions that will end up being a book eventually. But it's available for free. All the articles are for free on our website, and there will be a probably at some point a book that will be made about that. And some of those things have really been, I think, improved by some of the conversations that we've had about you know eschatology. Some of the stuff you don't like talking about all that much, but at least with me, maybe you like talking about it with other people.
No,
But
man, no. I just it is the the least well-defined thing in our Bible, and it's the thing that people love arguing about the most. And I just over the years, right? Like when I was younger and it was fresher and all the arguments were new, I I enjoyed it just as much as the rest. But yeah, over time, like I just tired of hearing the arguments. We're not really making any headway, and um, yeah,
That's true. For me personally, and I'm not saying that I'm right. I just where I'm at currently, right now, I think that the kingdom of God, when rightly understood, helps to bring a lot of clarity to all of these things. But because
and I
people
agree.
don't have,
I agree. It's just I get different clarity than you
I
get,
know,
right? Like I completely agree with that statement.
yeah,
But you and I still land the plane at different points.
yep,
So
we sure do. And I think that my opinion is that a lot of people that that I read or that I think that I have kind of interacted with their positions and the way that they approach Scripture. There's just a fundamental difference, I guess, of how we approach it. And I can understand why I think a lot of people end up in the spots that they do. Um, and I've landed at the spot that I've landed from, my approach. So anyway, it's obviously, the things that make sense to us, and
yeah.
best thing that we can do is talk about it, and hopefully, if we're wrong, we'll have the wisdom to forsake our goofy position and actually cling to the right thing. I don't have a I'm not passionate about trying to have people say that I was right. What I do want to be is actually right, and not because I, stumbled into it,
I
but
don't
because
mind
I've
it though. I mean,
changed my mind and
if
believed
you
what
want to
God
say,
has.
Greg, you're right. I wouldn't be opposed to that.
Yeah, yeah. But like I said, my a lot of my current position. I hope this is true for you as well, but I'm just speaking for myself. A lot of my current position has been clarified, partly from the disagreements that we've had, and
Oh, for
as
sure.
I think, unshockingly, right? I think you're wrong about certain things. You think I'm wrong about certain things. So as we think about that, I'm like, well, it makes you look into it in a different way and examine it from a different angle. And like you said, kind of that interrogation, right? You got to kind of interrogate your position and go, why do
Yeah.
I believe this? And like, does this position make sense? Or like, what does this actually say? People bring up things that, you brought up plenty of things that I've never um, examined from that particular perspective, and it made me look at it, and again, did I come to the same conclusion that you did? No, but I'm thankful that you at least asked the question so that I could, pursue it and look into that, because you see some places of ignorance in my own mind, because I don't know everything. I can't keep everything in my mind all at the same time. And so um, I'm appreciative that you've looked at these things from a different perspective, and it's helped shape my mind, and it has helped change my mind, even if it hasn't changed my mind to the position that you currently hold.
Yeah.
And I
No,
think
and I have the same thing, right? Like there are things, and again, because we've had such a friendship over so many years, there have been little things, just little nuggets that you drop sometimes that probably are more uh, ideologically earth shattering than you even realize. And so many of the things I definitely have over time drifted much closer to the way you probably see them. And then there are other times where it's funny. I like to consider myself a person self-aware enough to understand that I have blind spots, and I like to consider myself a person open-minded enough to see, or to be willing be willing to try to place myself in somebody else's perspective. And so there have been things that we've had discussions about, right? Okay, I'm going to I'm going to try to grasp that view. And so I can feel myself, as I think about it, as I consider it, kind of move off of where I'm landed, and evolve, and then eventually come and land right back at the same place I was. And
hmm,
so whether that's good or bad, I don't know, but I enjoy that mental process of trying to put away my presuppositions, see it from somewhere else, um, and whether I move or not, I like that mental exercise.
yeah. No, amen. I do too. And it's one of the, I think people rob themselves a lot of times of just kind of surrounding themselves in an echo chamber with people that think the way that they do, and approach everything the exact same way that they do. And they're so offended by anybody who thinks differently or talks differently. Um, I think I've learned a lot from people that have similar views to myself. I think I've learned probably more from interacting with people that have different views. Um, and like I say, um, you've said before, you said it even today before we were filming. You're not sure if you've ever changed my mind on anything, which I think is a funny statement because you've changed my mind on a lot of things. You haven't necessarily convinced me to fully articulate it the way that you would. But that process that you were just describing, I don't know that I ever land in exactly the same spot, and so
Sure.
you know, you think about something and you're like, well, okay, that did change my mind. Sometimes it pushes me further away from what you were saying, but it did change my mind. It was a valuable perspective,
You
and
changed my mind. You are a complete idiot.
no,
Not
no,
just
it's not that. It's just, like, you'll make me think about something that I wasn't thinking about, and because I do value your perspective, even on things that we disagree on. I because I know you and I know that you're serious. If we disagree, I am perfectly comfortable with stating that I very well could be 100% wrong about this. Um, so, at this point in my life, just like with you at this point in your life, we've studied the Bible to an extent that I'm probably not 100% wrong about any of these issues. There's going to be at least some biblical basis for any position that we hold. So, one of the reasons why I particularly enjoy talking about the things that we disagree about, um, like eschatology, because you're right, it isn't as well defined as I would like it to be. It's not the primary focus of the Bible. Where the implications of eschatology, the thing that we definitely agree on is that Jesus Christ is going to come back. We're supposed to live in light of this truth, the
Mhm.
fact that Jesus Christ is King, that He is Lord, that His kingdom reigns over all the kingdoms of the earth. Despite the differences that we would articulate, we agree on those things, and those main substances are um, way more valuable than the things that we disagree on. But when we do disagree on the timing, or is there a rapture or isn't there a rapture? Or is the millennial kingdom an actual 1,000-year reign, or is it happening right now? These kinds of things, when we are so far off on those, yeah, there are times where I'm sure you think I'm crazy and I think you're crazy. And, the last conversation that Eric and I had when you were gone, it's like, ah, let's hear, like, how in the world do you end up there? What is going on? And, I think, um, all we can do is be honest with each other about it, and it doesn't mean we don't like each other or value each other. Like I say, I listened to some of the explanations, and I still, at this point, maybe I am the one who's wrong. You haven't convinced me yet. Clearly haven't convinced you yet, um, and that's okay. I don't need to convince you. You don't need to convince me. We can still be friends. We can still be fruitfully, partnered together and in pursuing the things that we agree on. Because those, again, for anybody that hasn't gotten it yet, like, even when it seems like we really, man, you guys really disagree. Um, we're not trying to be divided. And it breaks my heart when you see, churches that have different eschatological views that
Yeah.
literally can't fellowship together. Like, what do you guys do? You not realize that this isn't the only thing? It's not. It's just not the only
Do,
thing.
do you and plus think about it, how annoying would it be if I couldn't look at you and go, "You're wrong." Like I love being able to do that.
Yeah.
So I need you to be wrong about something. So it makes me feel so much better about myself.
Yeah. Well, anyway, um,
So what
we could go.
about what about other resources, right? Like you got some coffee cups back there, you got stuff on the wall. What
Yeah, we've created a lot of stuff. A lot of those. There's stories behind, of course, all these designs. I don't think we probably have time to get into that, but there are lots of things that we've created over time. Probably the most valuable one. It's on my wall, but you can't see it in my screen. Is
Oh,
the
I can
chart?
I think I can see it.
The
Oh, maybe
chart that
you're
we made, our King's chart. You can see that.
Oh, no, I thought you were the names of
Hi.
God chart. I can or the
Oh,
names of God thing.
yeah.
I really like that.
Yeah, that one's not available to buy. We made
Oh,
that one.
gotcha.
I received one of those as a gift. It's actually pretty cool. Somebody, instead of like a picture of Jesus holding a lamb or something, he gave we had studied names of God and attributes of God, and he took the attributes of God, scriptural references and definitions of those, and put them in a frame. Um, and so I've made a couple of those, and I have one here, one at our home,
Yeah.
and I really like that. I like you know seeing the
I was going to
attributes
do
of
that. I
God.
just never did it. So
Sure.
yeah.
Maybe I'll have to do it for you and just give
Oh,
you one.
I appreciate it. So what's the King's chart? What?
So we a brother in Christ that Chris. He and I worked on that together. Chris did a lot of the legwork for that one, and but we produced a chart. You made one similar
Oh, my
that you shared with
timeline.
me.
Yeah, yeah.
A timeline for the northern and southern kingdom. So
Yep.
basically, it's from the split kingdom with Jeroboam and Rehoboam to the destruction of the temple, and so we got all the kings listed, and we worked to try and arrange those based on kind of reading, because you get the parallel accounts. We
Yep.
did the northern
Yep.
and then the south,
Yeah.
uh, and then we kind of got some color coding in there, so like all the good kings are in green. There's no
Oh.
good kings in the northern
So
kingdom.
it's a lot. It sounds like it's a lot like what I did then.
Very similar to yours, yeah.
Yeah.
And so ours just has a different flair to it. But that's actually probably the resource that I use the most. It's like the wallpaper for my computer screen at home. And
Do you have the prophets in there? Like I
yeah, I got the minor prophets.
did you just like steal what I did then? And
ours
like,
was done first. You
Was it
you sent
really?
yours to me. Ours has been published for a long, long time.
Oh,
Um,
wow. If
but,
I'd known that, I wouldn't have done all the work.
I know. Well, no, but it's good for you to do the work, right? It's
It
good
is
for you
good
to
for me.
produce
It
it.
is.
And
Yeah.
we should compare ours sometime and see if we made all the
We
same
should.
decisions. But
Yeah.
it's I tried printing this. One of the reasons why it's like, I think that like the paper one costs like $10 or something. It's on print demand. We don't make them. It's made by it's just like I don't make coffee cups. Like this is it's printed somewhere else. But they have a high quality printer. I tried to print off some like using our printer here, and it just didn't look good. But then we have bigger ones. Like this one that's over here is humongous, and
Okay.
I just like having it nearby because I'm not great at remembering who
I
is
open up
this
my
king.
timeline. I bet you I open it up once a week at least.
Yeah.
As I'm doing different things and going, oh, like, okay, reading through the prophets, just
Mhm.
knowing where that prophet's falling,
Yes.
Babylonian, Syrian. So yeah.
So that's probably the resource that I use the most, and so I got a big one that's sitting over here, and I mean that thing isn't cheap. I don't I don't know that anybody else will. A couple of people have bought the really big one, but I like having it, and I like being able to see it from even across the room. If I'm studying the Bible, I just turn around and look at it over there. Again, it's
Yeah.
on the background of my computer at home, so that I just I want to be able to see it often. Because that history is it's important, and it's not easy for me to keep in my mind and keep them all straight. So
I'll have to check that one out.
yeah, so that one was probably the one that I like the most. Not necessarily that I use the most, but there's a poster that we have of the 5 trustworthy statements that Paul made from First and Second Timothy and Titus, and I like that one because I was preaching through Paul's epistles, and those trustworthy statements. I was just like, man, I'll throw that up on a piece of artwork. Got these other ones, just like the fruit of the Spirit. We talked about that one before. Like, they all came from a place of ministry or some truth that kind of really struck me. And then I thought, well, maybe we can first and foremost, I'll make something that I find beneficial, and then now I can actually have something that I can look at and remind myself out of the fires from Jude 1:23. It tells us of our responsibility to snatch people out of the fire. I know people say, "Oh, God saves." Well, of course, God saves, but the way that God saves is by entrusting us with the gospel and telling us to go and proclaim it to people. And so I mean, it's just as biblical to say that we snatch people out of the fire as it is to say that of course, God is the one who saves.
Otherwise, Jude was talking not. I mean, like he's giving. Go do this.
Go do it. And so, if we did that without God doing it, then nobody would be saved. But God has given us the tool. He's indwelt us with the Holy Spirit. He's given us the gospel. Jesus Christ came and achieved salvation for all who believe. So now we're supposed to go and proclaim this message and snatch people out of the fire. That's the stakes. So I like to have that on my wall to remind me. I have an evangelism class called Out of the Fire class, and that image, that's like the main image for it. But
Nice.
that the image existed first. So again, all the stuff that's on our store, like I say, nobody has to buy any of it. If you buy it, we do make a little bit of money. Our ministry will continue whether or not you buy it, so you don't have to go and purchase it. But I think that these things, they're intended to be thought provoking, hopefully to help people. Maybe if you have these coffee cups like this, no golden calves. The golden calf's name was Yahweh. It's got the divine name on there. It's got a reference on here. You can't see it on the camera, but to Exodus 32, which is the original one, and 1 Corinthians 10:7, when Paul is using this to remind Christians not to have, basically not to make the same mistake that they made of making this safe idol and calling it by the name of the Lord, and then just doing whatever you want.
And things like that can help open doors for conversations where you can share the gospel, right?
Yeah.
Like it's pretty odd to see a coffee cup sitting on a guy or on a lady's desk that has a red X to a golden cow, right?
That's right.
That's a conversation starter.
Yeah. One says, don't follow your heart. That's like, again, that can be a real conversation starter. That's from the book of Numbers. And, we're supposed to follow the Lord, not follow our heart. But the world says the opposite. So stuff like that. Yeah. It's kind of like a version of a gospel tract almost, but, maybe if you're using this coffee cup at work, somebody be like, hey, what's that all about? And you can tell them, come, believe, follow, live is similar to the John's Gospel devotional study guide. I think that the modern message is come and believe, but the biblical message is actually come, believe, and follow. And so, I just wanted to make that explicit on some of this stuff. So all these things come from a place like that. Again, they're intended to either encourage and remind Christians of what it is that we're supposed to do, or potentially open up doors of conversation for others. And hopefully they're valuable to some people. If they're not, no sweat off my back. Again, they're print on demand, so I don't have a warehouse full of these things. It doesn't I have them for my own use, and if they're a benefit to anybody else, they're available. And it slightly supports our ministry, but again, it's not necessary. So if nobody else likes them,
stop underselling it. It's okay.
Buy all the coffee cups. Buy all the mugs.
There you go, man.
Get you some. Mostly, what you should do is buy Greg's book. That's what I think you should do. If I'm being honest, they can buy your book, and
then hand them out to people. Hand them out to young ladies.
Yeah.
Go buy copies of J.C. Ryle's book. He's been dead 200 years almost, but it's good stuff.
I know you really highly recommend that one. Leo was edified by that. He enjoyed that. He was thankful that you gave it to him. So that's all I got. You got anything else? I mean, I think we probably talked it to death at this point.
Yeah, I've got to drink too much coffee, so
all right.
It's time to move on.
Well, on that unpleasant note, we'll sign off for today. And if you are still watching, let us know in the comments below. Maybe tell us about some resources that you appreciate, things that have either edified you as a Christian or that you find valuable maybe in helping to spread the gospel far and wide. And if you are a Christian, I would remind you that, again, we don't just live for ourselves, but we live for him who lived and died and rose again for us, who died for our salvation, and who's called us into a bigger purpose to live for the glory of his name being extended to the ends of the earth. So get equipped, obey your king, and glorify your God.
There's always this goofy thing that happens in the back of my mind where, I write it and I read it and I edit it. Okay, I'm going to send this to somebody, and man, they're going to be blown away. Like it's going to be, they're going to be shocked by how profound, and then you get it back and there's red everywhere and circles and I'm like, oh wow, I'm really kind of mentally handicapped and I didn't realize it. So